Are you watching your own skin peel off in pieces? Not metaphorically, literally, entire layers peeling off while you're still alive. And worst of all, this is only the third day, because the Plague of Athens didn't kill you quickly. It made you rot from the inside out for 9 endless days, 430 BC. Athens, the most advanced city in the ancient world. Hippocratic medicine, Socratic philosophy, democracy. None of it saved a third of the population. 100,000 people died vomiting their own liquefied organs. And most terrifyingly, to this day no one knows exactly what it was. Typhoid fever, ancient Ebola, something that no longer exists. Thucydides, the historian, caught the plague and survived. He described every symptom in obsessive detail. Eyes turning bloodshot, tongues rotting in the mouth, thirst so extreme that people threw themselves into wells to drown because it was better than the agony. Fingers and toes falling off on their own, genitals necrotizing and detaching from the body. But here's what will make you never complain about the pandemic again. The plague arrived during a siege. All of Athens was locked within its walls. 400,000 people in a space meant for 100,000. No sanitation, not enough food, no hope of escape. It was die by the plague or die by the Spartans. And believe me, the plague was worse, 430 BC. Athens wasn't just a city, it was the impossible happening. While the rest of the world lived in tribes banging stones together, only the Parthenon existed, a structure so mathematically perfect that modern computers can barely replicate it. There was the Theatre of Dionysus, where 15,000 people watched tragedies that we still study today. There was the Agora, a 40,000 square meter square, where the concept of public debate was born. It was as if aliens had built Manhattan in the middle of the African savannah. Pericles had ruled for almost 30 years. He wasn't a king, he was a strategoi, democratically elected. That's right, democracy in action 400 years before Christ. Every citizen voted by raising their hand. Of course, citizen meant male, adult, born in Athens, landowner, perhaps 10% of the population, but still revolutionary. People deciding their own destiny instead of obeying a tyrant. The city itself was a miracle of engineering. Aqueducts brought water from mountains miles away. Underground sewers carried waste far away, something London wouldn't have until 2,000 years later. The streets were laid out in a grid, not the organic chaos typical of the time. There were public fountains every 100 meters, gymnasiums where young men trained naked. Gymnasium comes from the Greek gymnos nou, nude gymnasium. Libraries with thousands of scrolls, the Lyceum where Aristotle would teach, Plato's academy. But the real miracle was the people. Socrates walked barefoot through the city, questioning everything. I only know that I know nothing. It wasn't humility, it was method. He would stop anyone on the street and shatter their certainties with questions. Phidias sculpted statues so perfect that it was said the gods posed for him. Aeschylus wrote plays that invented the concept of tragedy. Herodotus was inventing history as a discipline, not myths, but documented facts. Commerce was booming. Ships from all over the world arrived at Piraeus, the port. Wheat from Egypt, wine from Lesbos, olive oil from Crete, slaves from Thrace. Yes, slaves, 200,000 of them, half the population. Athenian democracy and philosophy were financed by slave labor. A paradox they didn't even realize. But in 431, Sparta declared war, the Peloponnesian War. Athens dominated the sea with 200 triremes. Sparta dominated the land with the most feared hoplites in the world. Pericles had a strategy: abandon the countryside and shelter the entire population within the Long Walls. The Long Walls were Athens' military marvel. 2 parallel 40-canas-long walls connecting the city to the port of Piraeus. 6 meters wide, 10 meters high. The space between them was a protected highway. As long as Athens controlled the sea, supplies were endless. Sparta could lay siege for years, useless. It was a brilliant idea in theory. But when you take 100,000 people from the countryside, farmers, shepherds, whole families with their animals and belongings, and throw them into an already crowded city, you don't create safety. You create a death trap. 400,000 people living in a space made for 100,000. There were no homes left. People slept in the streets, in temples, even in cemeteries. Tents made of leather and cloth filled every open space. The marketplace became a slum. The Parthenon turned into a shelter. Public toilets were made for 100,000, but now they had to serve 4 times that number. Soon people started using the streets. The sewers got blocked within days. Waste flowed through every alley. The smell was so bad that foreign visitors vomited as soon as they entered the city. Water became more precious than gold. Fountains had lines of 1,000 people. Fights broke out. Some were stabbed just for a place in line. Families sent their children early in the morning to save a spot. Many ended up drinking from the river, the same river used for washing clothes, tanning leather, and dumping trash. Food was rationed from day one. Every citizen got just a small piece of grain each day. Foreigners got less. Slaves got almost nothing. Within a week, children and the elderly started dying from hunger, but that was only the beginning. The real nightmare was coming. Sailing from Ethiopia, passing through Egypt across the sea toward the port of Piraeus. It carried more than trade goods. It began there in the summer of 430 BC. The heat was 42 degrees. Rocks cracked under the sun. 400,000 people sweating, vomiting, and dying on top of each other. The smell felt alive. Even sailors fainted when they stepped off their ships. At first, only a few dock workers got sick. Headaches, nothing strange for that heat. But soon historian Thucydides caught the disease and survived to describe it. He wrote every detail. Healthy people were suddenly struck by burning heat in the head. Their eyes turned red and swollen, not pink but blood red, as if the veins had exploded. People looked like demons even before death. On the second day, things got worse. Sneezing so hard it broke bones. Coughing that tore the throat. People vomiting strange colors, black, yellow, green, not bile but their own liquefied organs. By the third day, their skin turned red and swollen. Dark blisters appeared, filled with black liquid that smelled like rotten meat. When they burst, they left holes that reached the muscle and bone. The worst was the thirst. People drank liters of water, but it never helped. Some threw themselves into wells just to stop the burning inside. The fever was so high that people tore off their clothes and ran naked through the streets, diving into fountains. The healthy tried to fight them off with spears to stop them from poisoning the water. On the fifth day came the diarrhea. Black, bloody, and endless. The smell made others vomit from far away. Many crawled away to die alone, not from courage but from shame. By the sixth or seventh day, their fingers and toes turned black. The flesh died but stayed attached. Some tried to cut them off. It was useless. The poison was already in their blood. Genitals also gangrened. Men and women watching their sexual organs rot and fall off. Those who reached the ninth day and survived, about 30%, paid a heavy price. Many were permanently blinded. Others lost their memories completely. Thucydides recorded cases of men who forgot their names, their families, their entire lives. They wandered naked through the city, immortal to reinfection but dead inside. The speed of its spread defied comprehension. A house infected by morning had everyone dead or dying by nightfall. Entire neighborhoods fell silent within 3 days. The ceramics district of Aleros lost 90% of its population in a week. Only the smell remained. Doctors were the first to fall en masse. They applied the Hippocratic theory of humors. They bled patients who were already losing blood through blisters. They prescribed purgatives for those already suffering from lethal diarrhea. They burned the blisters with a hot iron, causing instantaneous widespread infection. Within 2 weeks, there was not a single doctor left in Athens. Medicine died before most of its patients. It's impossible to describe the speed with which a complex society descends into absolute chaos. Athens took 5 centuries to build its civilization. It took 5 days to lose it completely, when the plague exploded on a massive scale. The first system to collapse was the funerary system. The Greeks had elaborate death rituals. The body was washed, anointed with eyes, dressed in white, a coin placed in the mouth for Charon, 3 days of mourning, a procession to the cemetery, cremation or burial with offerings, essential for the soul to reach Hades properly. Without the rituals, eternal damnation. On the 3rd day of widespread plague, there were more dead than living to bury. Bodies piled up in houses. Families tried to drag their dead into the street at night, abandoning them. By morning, the streets were impassable. You literally had to climb over piles of corpses to get out of your house. Communal funeral pyres were organized, but there wasn't enough wood. People invaded other families' pyres, threw their dead and fled. Violent fights broke out over piles of bodies, sons battling for the right to burn their father. Absurd, it became routine, so they simply gave up. Bodies were thrown into mass graves, then no graves at all, piled in squares, thrown into the sea. thrown over the walls to the Spartans, anywhere except near the still living. The Parthenon, the sacred temple of Athena, had bodies rotting on the steps. An unthinkable sacrilege a week before, now normal. The law evaporated like water in the heat. The 11 magistrates responsible for the order died or fled. The prison was abandoned with prisoners inside. They died of thirst, not the plague. Courts closed. The assembly was cancelled. Of the 500 buletas, 300 were dead. There was no quorum for democracy. Without law, the social fabric completely fell apart. Thucydides documented it with horror. Men dared what they had previously hidden. They saw the rich die suddenly and the poor inherit their wealth. Then, they decided to spend everything on immediate pleasure since life and money were equally fleeting. Rapes in the middle of the agora, murders for a piece of bread, children killing sick parents to inherit their inheritances, slaves killing their masters, assuming their identities. Total social inversion. A Thracian slave declared himself a citizen. He voted in the assembly that no longer existed. He died 2 days later, laughing at the irony. But the worst was the religious collapse. Athens was deeply religious. Festivals for the gods structured the year. Daily sacrifices ensured divine protection. Oracles guided decisions. When the plague arrived, temples filled, sacrifices increased, and daily ecatombs without sacrificed oxen. Nothing. Apollo, god of medicine, and ironically of plagues, didn't respond. Athena, protector of the city, whose temple dominated the silent Acropolis. Asclepius, god of useless healing. The people realized either the gods didn't exist or they didn't care, or they were on Sparta's side. The result was pure nihilism. Why follow divine laws if the gods have abandoned you? What's the point of morality if you die tomorrow? Bacchanalia erupted in houses with the still warm dead. Orgies in temples, drunken binges using sacred wine. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die became the city's motto. Thucydides captured the exact moment of the final collapse. The most terrible thing was the discouragement when someone felt ill. Despairing, they immediately abandoned themselves without trying to resist. People simply gave up, felt the first symptom and lay down to die, not out of weakness but out of logic. Why fight the inevitable? Families disintegrated. Parents abandoned sick children. Children fled infected parents. Husbands left dying wives. Love, the foundation of human society, died. Only the animal instinct of individual survival remained. But even that was useless, because in besieged Athens, with plague on all sides, there was nowhere to run. Civilization had become a rat trap, and all the rats were dying. And in the midst of this apocalypse, Pericles watched his masterpiece turn into a nightmare. The man who for 30 years had guided Athens to the Apagus, who built the Parthenon, who made democracy flourish, now he saw everything rot faster than the bodies in the streets. But the plague had a special lesson for him. Power, wealth, and wisdom were equally useless against microscopic death. His friends died first. Phidias, the sculptor of the Parthenon, died vomiting his own liquefied viscera. Anaxagoras, the philosopher who explained it, died without understanding what was killing him. Aspasia, Pericles' companion, the most intelligent woman in Athens, survived only to watch the fall. Then the plague entered the home of Pericles, Xanthippus, his eldest son, the political heir. Pericles found him delirious, calling out to gods that didn't exist. The blisters covered his face so much that he was unrecognizable. Pericles held his son's hand for 3 days as he drowned in his own blood. When he finally died, Pericles didn't cry. Emotional paralysis. The brain refuses to process horror beyond a certain limit. To stop them, the youngest son contracted the plague at his brother's funeral. Irony sickening. He died faster, 2 days. Pericles tried every doctor still alive, offering his entire fortune for a cure. The doctors took the gold and fled or died trying. Paralus died, clutching an amulet of Apollo that didn't work. Pericles himself contracted the plague on the 8th day after losing his children. But his death was different, slower, more cruel. The plague seemed to savor the irony of slowly destroying the architect of the strategy, who created the perfect conditions for it to thrive. 3 weeks of agony instead of days. Plutarch recorded the delusions. Pericles believed Sparta had poisoned the wells after the gods punished him for hybris, after he was in Hades still alive. In the end, he recognized no one. The great orator stammered incoherently. The brilliant strategist couldn't remember his own name. He died covered in his own feces, unrecognizable alone because everyone was afraid to approach him. The Hippocratic physicians, the pride of Athens, were exposed as unwitting charlatans. The theory of the four humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, was completely useless. They tried bleeding people who were already bleeding. They tried warming those with fevers. They tried special diets for those who vomited everything. Nothing worked because they were fighting theories, not the actual disease. A physician named Diocles suggested that the plague came from miasma, the bad air of the swamps. He ordered giant bonfires to be lit to purify the air in the middle of summer, 42 degrees Celsius, plus bonfires. People died of dehydration before the plague could kill them. Another doctor blamed the excess blood supply for the plague, cutting the veins of already anemic people. He killed in hours what the plague took days. The philosophers offered no consolation. Socrates, always questioning everything, had no answer for innocent children dying in agony. When asked about divine justice, he replied, "I only know that I know nothing, and now I know that knowing saves no one." He ended up contracting the plague but survived. He later said he would rather have died than to have seen what he saw. Sophists charged fortunes for explanations. Gorgias said it was punishment for abandoning the ancient gods. Protagoras said it was proof that gods didn't exist. Thrasymachus said it was proof that justice was an illusion of the weak. Everyone died of the plague, eventually their philosophies dying with them. The aristocracy discovered that money didn't buy immunity. Callus, the richest man in Athens, offered his entire fortune for clean water. He discovered there was no clean water to buy. He died of thirst next to coffers full of useless gold. Nicias, the general, built an isolated shelter. The plague broke out anyway. He died alone, far from everyone, but he died the same. The most pathetic were the desperate attempts to escape. Nobles tried to bribe guards to get out of the walls. The guards took the gold and killed the nobles. The dead don't complain. Some managed to escape. They were captured by Spartans. They discovered that death by plague was better than death by Spartan torture. The fall of Pericles marked the symbolic end. If the greatest man in Athens died babbling, covered in shit, what hope was there for the rest? None. And it was this realization that shattered the city's last vestige of psychological resistance. With Pericles dead, and what little government remained completely collapsed, it simply descended to the most primitive level of existence. And when I say primitive, I'm not exaggerating. Archaeological evidence and survivors' accounts confirm industrial-scale cannibalism began with the dead. In the second month of the plague, with port supplies cut off, no one wanted to dock in the plague-ridden city. Hunger compounded the disease. Human flesh was everywhere, fresh, free, already half-cooked by fever. First came the very poor, the already desperate. They ate discreetly at night, fingers, less obvious parts. Shame still existed, but hunger destroys shame quickly. Within a week, underground markets for human flesh were operating openly. They called it a special pig. Everyone knew, no one spoke. A butcher in the water was caught selling human livers. He was lynched, not for selling human meat, but for charging too much. Thucydides documented the unthinkable. Families rationally eating their own dead. Better us than the worms, they said. Rituals emerged to make it psychologically tolerable. Prayers before eating, thanks to the dead for sacrificing themselves. Collective madness disguised as pragmatism, but the dead didn't last. They rotted quickly in the heat. So they started with the dying. Terminally ill people were helped to die. A euphemism for murder for food. Families collectively decided, Grandma is dying anyway. Better to enjoy it while the meat is on the bones. Children were forced to participate. Family tradition. The next logical and monstrous step. Active hunting. Gangs formed. Preferred targets. Lonely patients, abandoned children, frail old people, dragged to hospitals, basements where they were butchered alive. Alive because dead flesh rots. Screams echoed through the neighborhoods. Everyone pretended not to hear. An economy even emerged. Children were worth more, tender meat. Healthy adults were too expensive. They fought hard. Early-stage patients were ideal, weak, but still with muscle mass. Prices were fixed. A leg, 5 drachmas, an arm, 3 internal organs, 10. Brains were a delicacy, 20 drachmas. But the true horror lay in the farms, basements where they kept people alive, cutting off pieces as needed. One man survived to report. He spent 3 weeks in a basement, watching as a finger was cut off a day from other prisoners, fed just enough to keep them from dying. When the plague ended and the basement was discovered, there were 15 people still alive, without legs, without arms, but alive. Children were the darkest chapter. Parents sold them, not as slaves but as future food. Buyers fattened them for days before slaughter. Some were forced to eat parts of other children. Meta-cannibalism. An 8-year-old girl was rescued after being forced to eat her own toes. She survived physically. Mentally, never. Temples theoretically sacred became slaughterhouses. Priests participated, justifying it as a necessary sacrifice. Dionysus, god of wine and madness, had an improvised cannibalistic cult. They ate raw human flesh in honor of the god. They drank blood mixed with wine, cannibalistic orgies, where sex and meat consumption occurred simultaneously. Quack doctors sold cures made from human parts, virgin hearts to cure fever, children's livers for strength, wise men's brains to recover lost memory, a macabre placebo. People paid fortunes, ate and died anyway, now also murderers. The most grotesque, the identity market linked to cannibalism. Someone rich was killed, their body eaten, their identity assumed, entire families replaced, neighbors pretended not to notice or were next. A man discovered he was dining with his sister's killer, wearing her clothes. He said nothing, kept eating. It was that or die. When there were perhaps 100,000 people left alive in Athens, cannibalism was so normalized that there was etiquette. No eating of the head, identification, no eating in public, keeping up appearances. Children under 5 were spared. Reproductive future. Pregnant women were given double value. All of this discussed and decided in survival councils. But even cannibalism had its limits. When they began eating plague victims, they discovered they were contracting the disease. Cannibalism ceased to be a solution and became an accelerated death sentence. Those who ate infected people died within days. Poetic, sickening justice. Now let's be brutally specific about your personal end. You, a modern 20th century person, with your knowledge of germs, hygiene, and medicine, magically transported to Athens on the first day of the plague. Spoiler, you would die, probably faster than the Athenians. And I'll explain exactly how. Day 0, you arrive in Athens knowing what's coming. You try to warn. You talk about bacteria, viruses, contagion problems. You don't speak ancient Greek fluently. Even if you did, there are no words for microorganisms. You sound crazy. Invisible animals that cause disease laugh at you. If you insist too much, you'll be stoned for impiety. You question the gods. You try modern preventive measures. Wash your hands. With what soap? There isn't any. You try to make it with ashen grease. It takes days. Meanwhile, you're already exposed to boiling water. With what fuel? Wood is rationed for funeral pyres. Coal is for forging weapons. You drink contaminated water on the first day or die of thirst. Social isolation. Impossible. You're in a city with 400,000 people in a space meant for 100,000. There's nowhere to isolate yourself. You sleep in a tent with 20 strangers. Everyone is spitting and defecating 2 meters away from you. Social distancing is a cruel joke. Day 3. You feel your first headache. You deny it, it's just stress. But you know, your eyes start to get red. You try to treat yourself with modern knowledge, hydration, but the water is contaminated. Rest, but there's nowhere to rest. Food, but there's only moldy barley porridge. Day 5, the blisters appear. Your medical knowledge is torture now. You know not to pop them. You know secondary infection is the danger, but there are no antibiotics. There's not even alcohol to disinfect. The blisters burst on their own, becoming infected. You know exactly how you're going to die, and you can't do anything. The infernal thirst sets in. You understand it's cellular dehydration. You need intravenous saline, but there's none. You try to make homemade serum, salt and sugar in water. But what sugar? Honey costs more than gold. Salt is imported. Water is contaminated. You drink it and it gets worse. Day 7. Gangrene in the extremities. You know you need to amputate. You even have theoretical knowledge of how to do it. But with what? Unsterilized bronze knives. You would die within hours without anesthesia. You would die from shock. You watch your fingers rot. Useless knowledge torturing your mind. Your intestines begin to necrotize. You know you're defecating pieces of your own colon. You know that intestinal perforation means peritonitis. You know you have maybe 12 hours. Knowledge without power is the worst torture. The Athenians' ignorance was mercy. You know too much to have false hope. But here's the worst part. Your modern knowledge would make you guilty. When you tried to explain contagion, quarantine, hygiene, you would be accused of causing the plague. He knew, he brought it. You would be lynched or worse, kept alive to be tortured for information about the curse you cast. If you miraculously survived the 9 days, your fate would be worse than death. Blind because you don't have antibiotic eye drops. Amnesiac because brain fever causes permanent damage without antipyretics. You would forget all modern knowledge. You would become just another naked madman wandering Athens, but you would probably be eaten first. Your smooth modern skin, unhardened by manual labor, would be noticed. This is noble in disguise quality meat. You would wake up in a basement tied up, watching knives being sharpened. Your knowledge of anatomy would only make it more terrifying to know exactly where they would cut first. They would try to explain future technology that could help you. Fever delirium, they would say. They would cut out your tongue first to stop the discomfort. You would die mute, knowing everything and unable to change anything. The ultimate irony. Your educated brain would be sold as a delicacy to cure ignorance. It wouldn't cure. And when the plague finally passed, after decimating a third of the population, you were never the same again. Not just demographically, psychologically, spiritually. The city that invented democracy, philosophy, and theater died that summer of 430. What survived was a shell, a shadow, a memory of what it once was. Athens lost the Peloponnesian War, not militarily. It lasted another 26 years. It lost morally. How can you fight for a city where you ate your neighbor? How can you have civic pride when you abandoned your parents to die? The Spartans didn't even need to destroy Athens. Athens had already destroyed itself from within. Democracy never fully recovered. How can you vote after seeing the assembly become a human flesh market? The 30 tyrants seized power easily in 404. No one truly resisted. What morals did they have to resist? Everyone was either accomplices or victims, or both of the horror. But the worst legacy was precedent. Athens proved that civilization is a 3-day veneer. 3 days without food, 3 days without law, 3 days with a plague, and the entire veneer peels away, revealing the beast beneath. This knowledge poisoned the ancient world. If Athens could sink so low, anyone could. And here's the horror you need to understand. We still don't know what the Plague of Athens was. After 2,500 years with all our technology, it's still a mystery. Typhoid fever doesn't explain gangrene. Typhus doesn't explain extreme thirst. Ebola didn't exist outside of Africa. Smallpox doesn't cause amnesia, which is even more terrifying. It could have been something that no longer exists, or worse, something dormant waiting for similar conditions. And guess what? We're creating these conditions now. Refugee camps with a population density higher than Athens under siege. Slums without sanitation. Climate change thawing 50,000-year-old viruses. Gaza today has a higher population density than Athens in 430. The same sanitary conditions during sieges, the same impossibility of escape, the same recipe for plague. All that's missing is the right pathogen, and when it arrives, it won't be contained by planes. It took Athens months to infect 100,000. Today, it would infect 100 million in weeks. Antibiotics are ceasing to work. Superbugs resistant to everything already exist. KPC, NDM1, VRSA. Acronyms of the apocalypse. Your appendectomy could become a death sentence. It's already becoming one in some places. We're back to dying from simple infections like in Athens, but the truly terrifying parallel is psychological. Look at how we reacted to COVID. Initial denial, it's just the flu. Panic buying. Conspiracy theories. Violence over toilet paper. Abandonment of elderly people in nursing homes, and COVID had a 1% mortality rate. Imagine something with a 70% mortality rate, like the Plague of Athens. How long until cannibalism today? Less than you think. Venezuela already has reports. North Korea has confirmed reports. Syria during the siege of Aleppo. Always officially denied, always happening. Because hungry humans are predictable. Athens was no exception. It was the rule we pretended didn't exist. Your cell phone, your internet, your technological civilization, everything depends on fragile supply chains. A ship caught in the mud stopped the world. Imagine a plague closing all ports. End of global trade. End of medicines, imported food, fuel. How long until your city becomes Athens? 3 days. Studies show, after 3 days without food, normal people begin to consider cannibalism. After a week, they practice it. You're no different. You've just never been tested. Athens thought it was the pinnacle of civilization. You think the same. Athens was wrong. You are too. Share this video now, not as ancient history, but as a warning or as prophecy, because the next plague won't come on horseback like in Athens. It will come by plane. And when it arrives, you'll have exactly the same choices as the Athenians. Die while remaining human or survive by becoming a monster. Comment 430. The Antichrist could be tomorrow, and so could your city. We need to map out who understands that civilization is the illusion of 3 meals. Subscribe, activate the bell. Next video. How would you die in the Antonine Plague? Rome hid 15 million dead because Thucydides survived and documented it, so we can learn his last words about the plague. I write so that future generations will recognize the symptoms and prepare. 2,500 years later, we failed to recognize and prepare. Athens fell in 430 BC. Christian, and when it falls, you will discover the same truth as the Athenians. Between civilization and barbarism, there are only 3 days and a plague. The only question is, are you ready to choose who to eat first? Because someone will have to choose, and it could be you or you could be the chosen one.